I have a twofold task today. I want to speak to you on the African presence in early Europe, which is the subject of the latest journal that was published in December of last year, as well as to acquaint you with something of the life and work of a man who has just died and who is perhaps the greatest among us in the 20th century in terms of scholarship in African civilizations. Let me say something first of this man. I never met him for about 10 years. I communicated with him for a long time, for nearly a decade before I actually met him. I only met him eventually in England last January, not this last January, but the January of 1985. I had to speak in England on the same platform with Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop. Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop is the only man outside of W.E.B. Du Bois who was awarded a special award, given a special award for being the man who's had the greatest impact on black thought in the 20th century. He is a man of extraordinary, he was a man, he died in February of this year, he died on February the 7th. He was a man of incredible versatility. He was a great physicist. He worked in the most advanced laboratory in France under Frédéric Joliot-Curie, and Frédéric Joliot-Curie was a close friend of Einstein, and at the time when only about a dozen people in the world could understand Einstein, Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop of Senegal translated Einstein's relativity theory into Wolof, his native language. Because of his scientific skills also, he was able to do extraordinary things. He, for example, invented a chemical process to test melanin in the skin of black people who had died thousands of years ago. By that process, he could prove beyond the shadow of a doubt, in a very scientific way, that the mummies, many of the mummies that had been excavated in early times, belonged to black people, because there's been a long question and dispute about whether they were blacks or whites or Hamites or Semites, etc. But he's been able to establish this by probing in the skin that is left on the bones of some of these mummies and establishing that the density of melanin in the skins makes it quite clear they could not be of any race but African. He also, because of his great knowledge in this field, in the scientific field, for example, he was able to show something which I only learned about a few months ago and which has startled me, and that is that while I have been able to show in Blacks in Science that blacks invented an extremely advanced process for smelting steel and were in advance of the rest of the world in this process, I had never suspected that blacks had actually started iron smelting. And I'm not talking about iron mining. One knew of that a long time ago. Blacks mined iron 45,000 years ago or 43,000 years ago. It means they have found iron pits dug in South Africa. That's not important, because that does not involve the technological process of changing the ore into something else. That's a highly advanced process that only occurs later in man. Now he has shown that as early as the ancient Egyptian dynasties, at the time of the building of the Great Pyramid, they found iron in between the cracks, and they said that this iron had fallen from a higher strata. That means a later strata. I had read that and I had taken it for granted, as most people in the world had taken it for granted. But Diop, by studying the iron, showed that it was a soft iron, and that it was not as true what Leclerc and Moni, the French interpreters, said, that because it was soft iron, it was inferior iron. He showed that in order to arrive at soft iron, you have to decarbonize the iron, and to decarbonize the iron, you have to reduce the carbon, and you can only reduce the carbon to that state if you're in an advanced stage of iron smelting. In other words, instead of it being a low-level stage, it was an advanced stage. Now only someone who's trained in that field was able could establish that. So that his science wasn't just something where you just go and sit in a laboratory. In fact, Sheikh Anta Diop is one of the few Africans who had access to the most advanced knowledge, scientific knowledge in the world. He was the man who directed and created and founded and built up the radiocarbon laboratory in Dakar, Senegal. And he was the president of the World Black Researchers Association. That is the reason why I am filled with sadness at the moment, but at the same time filled with a great hope, because Sheikh Anta Diop kept saying again and again, you're going to have to work eventually without me. Why I am sad is because we were working on things that were absolutely vital, that involve both Africans and Americans, because our main concern is how you can have the kind of technological transfer from America, particularly through black Americans, into Africa. So that this kind of gap that exists, which exists as a result of the destruction of African civilizations, need not continue forever. That is the reason why Diop formed a technological consortium. Diop also was a politician. Diop would have been the next president of Senegal. This is very important because Diop would have led, in the way Nkrumah may have been unable to, Diop was in a position to lead half of West Africa into a federation. If he had succeeded in doing that, that was the beginning of a different kind of black unity and strength on the continent. Diop also was a great Egyptologist. Nobody has written a book to date that goes as far in establishing the African basis of Egyptian civilization as Diop has in his book, The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. He's also a great linguist. He was able to establish that Egyptian language is not Afro-Semitic or Afro-Hamitic or Afro-anything. It is fundamentally African. And this he established at one of the great conferences, UNESCO conference in 1974 in Cairo, Egypt. It is amazing. Let me just read a paragraph from my editorial, because I'm bringing out a book next month called Great African Thinkers, Volume 1, Sheikh Anta Diop, in which I summarize what happened at this great debate. And it is amazing when you read this, you get some idea of how the Africans for the first time startled European scholarship. You know, it's all very well to get up and talk about Africans created this or invented this, etc. But when one has to stand